Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending upon where you're at when you're seeing this. I'm Kevin Carpenter. I'm a volunteer for CPPCon, ACCU. I like to volunteer. That's how I go to conferences. But I get the pleasure of being here with Laura, who just keynotes like all the time, it seems. I I'm sorry. I'm looking at the list on the page. How did you? So the talks I didn't get to see your talk in person at CPPCon, but you speak so well. So how does that come about? How did you get to where you are, Laura? I want to know.
Oh man. So I am actually more a writer than a speaker. I like to, when I have an experience, especially a really tough experience or one that makes me go like, why did that just happen? Or I really messed up, or they really messed up and they need to know how to do better, then I like to write it out into a story and then put it together into something that can make sense to other people. A lot of my talks, the unwritten subtitle is like, do better, people. So around like localization or teaching, that's one that I really enjoyed giving, was like, hey, friends, we're attempting to impart information to other people all the time. It turns out there is a whole industry out there, like, and discipline about how to teach, and let's learn from that.
Teaching is hard. So I say that because during the .coms, when all the colleges were trying to catch up, I actually got asked to write a Linux course, and so I'd done enough Linux, and I it's not something that I have I didn't have a computer science degree, so that was even more odd for them to ask me to write a Linux course. So I wrote the course, and it turned out being used for quite a few years. But then after writing the course, they asked me to teach it. The hubris of my 20s, thinking that I could teach a course without having had any actual training on teaching, in the wisdom of being older now, I feel bad for the students I had then. It's like teaching is a skill. It is a tough thing, and I have a lot of respect for people that can teach. And there's certain things I can definitely teach more now, but to that point, it is definitely a skill, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's always amazing how you put something out there with an actual student, and the first time you're like, oh no, this didn't land at all. Like I also like to volunteer when I have time. I used to volunteer with App Camp for Girls, which took middle school girls and in 1 week would teach them to make an app in Xcode. Like,
oh wow.
In Objective-C too.
I think it took me 2 weeks just to open Xcode, let alone learn to do it in a week. So
we had some scaffolding, and Swift Playgrounds have made things a bit better. But I was on my way down to teach. I was taking a train from Seattle to Portland, and I had written up how I was going to intro this Swift Playground to the kids. And then thought, okay, I've got this pretty good. And I happened to be sitting next to like a 10-year-old. And I said, hey, do you want to learn to use Xcode? And like try teaching this stuff to her. And realized she wasn't even sure where to put the cursor to type the code in the function. Like I had function bodies written out, and she didn't know, like, well, of course the code goes between the braces. Like that's not intuitive when you're seeing it for the first time. So
no.
Yeah, it's trial and error that makes teachers great.
That and boy, you never really know how much you don't know something until you try to teach it to someone else.
Absolutely. Yep.
But the other example I have is that thing of there's the intellectual point of, oh, I know that. Like you can tell somebody everything's changing and everybody knows everything's changing, but there's that deep point where you realize change over time. And it's that. And so my other comparison is trying to teach, in my case, my teenage daughter to drive a manual transmission car, which she hated me for. But, it was interesting trying being technical, I started off, well, you hold the clutch and you do it like this, you do it like that. But then finally it became more of, okay, you need to feel how this is. You have to have that, okay, put your foot now, slowly let it, you feel when this particular thing happens. And then
Mhm.
you get that actualized learning of it. And I think that that's a cool thing when you see somebody get that aha. I mean,
Yes.
the the giving part, right? Carrying a scale, I think, was part of one of your talks where it was, and there was a lot about that
Yeah.
talk, but I liked that talk. That was a good one too.
Thanks for saying so. It's Yeah, that one came about when I was working at Khan Academy, yeah, a nonprofit with a
Yeah,
huge reach, and found that sometimes I was like, do I really have to fix this one bug, or are we really going to rewrite the data layer for the third time? And how I was going to stay engaged and
yeah,
excited in something that was important to me at a
right.
broad level, like access to education for everybody. Yes,
Yeah,
1,000%. But the day to day got it. You don't always feel the import of the thing that you're building.
right. No, I agree. It's I do like what I do for a living. I work for a credit card processor, so my customer is your terminal that you swipe your card at the gas
Okay.
station or stuff. Um, and and it does make me feel good that yes, it's credit card transactions, but you're able to get your groceries or pay at a restaurant. Um, but I do enjoy doing other things outside of that, just for the filling some of those gaps that we were
Yes.
talking about in your talk. So we're here to talk about ACCU, which I think is funny because you and I are in the same boat in that neither of us have ever been.
Yeah.
So are you excited? So have you been? You've been to London, I'm sure, with all your travels that I've seen. Yes.
Yes, I've
Okay.
I've been to London. That's actually where I had my first date with my husband.
Oh wow,
We were on a choir trip, and that our first date happened to be going to see Rent in
that's really
the West
cool.
End Theater. Yeah. But yeah, I've not been to ACCU, and I did when I was guy approached me
Yep.
about speaking, and I thought I that sounds nice. I don't know what it is, um,
Hmm.
but I didn't say that to him. I pinged actually the other CPPCon speakers from Adobe, so Dave Sanko and Dave
Yeah.
Abrahams and Sean Parent, and said, "Is this should I go?" And they were like, "Yes, yes. If you have a chance,
Yes.
absolutely do it." And I have a British coworker who sits near me, and I mentioned to him that I was going to do like this conference in Bristol, and he looked it up and he said, "Oh, ACCU. I went to that in the late '90s when I still lived in the UK, and it's it's cool. I'm excited to get to know like a long running conference that has this
So
history and
yes. I mean, sorry, not to interrupt, but that's the
yeah,
same thing.
please.
Like I started volunteering, CPP Con, I think my first one was 2014, which I think is when you were first starting to speak around that time, at least from your speaker
Probably.
list. You probably had stuff before that. But yeah, ACCU and just how long it's been running is an incredible thing to me. And so for anyone who's watching, if you haven't already done so, the conference starts April 17th. So get tickets. There's pre-conference classes too. Um, but so let me ask this, because when I was looking up and trying to understand more about you, how do you go from French religious studies to C++?
Yes. So I double majored in French and religious studies. My minor was in Japanese, and my thesis was applied linguistics, which is like language
Yep.
teaching.
Yes.
Um, and I started off as a language teacher for primary
Hmm.
schools. I taught
Okay.
French in Seattle. I taught English in France and in South Korea. Uh,
Oh wow.
and then realized that I didn't want to be in front of a classroom anymore. So because it is so much energy every day. Like
It is.
if you have a bad day, all your students have a bad day too. It's a lot. So I started working in a school office, and this office had a system where they printed out reports every 2 weeks and then would print out a new one and copy highlights from the old report to the new report, like physically. And I was like, oh my gosh, we can do better than this. And started getting it into Excel because it was my job to copy the highlights. It was like, this is not going to happen. And my then boyfriend, now husband, he was a programmer, and he always said, like, Laura, you should try to learn programming. You would love it. And I always said, no, I'm too creative for that. That's not my thing. But then working in Excel, I noticed like, oh, I'm doing these really repetitive tasks. I wrote more and more complicated formulas. I learned about making buttons that could do a lot of my job for me and started coding in VBA. Visual Basic for Applications.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
No. And
good to lay it out.
It's not a lovely language, right? But it was one that let me achieve a goal. And that was the most fun that I ever had at work, and that I wanted to stay late and finish it because I was involved in what I was doing, and thought, maybe my husband was right. Maybe I should look into this programming thing. So he taught me data structures and algorithms in C++. So,
wow, that's a jump. Like, I talk about going from like basic to Pascal to Turbo C++. You went from VBA to algorithm in C++.
Yeah, I legitimately thought I couldn't get hired unless like I could just balance a red-black tree on the fly. Like I thought that was just table stakes for being a programmer.
Well, I mean, there's some truth to that, though, that depending upon, everybody's got different interviewing processes, and I will say, like, where I'm at, that isn't the process that we use, but I have been humbled by one or two Bloomberg interviews, I will just say. Code up this mutex from scratch. Evidently, the answer is, I have stood mutex. Why would I code one from scratch is not the answer there.
Oh, shoot, that would be my answer for sure.
I understood the premise of what they were looking for. Yeah. So ACCU, I'm excited to go and see you there. What's your keynote going to be about?
So it's called Coping with Other People's Code. My initial title had been Handling Your Feelings About Other People's Design Patterns. And then I found out that people kept expecting me to really dish about specific design patterns. I'm like, no, that's not the point. Like the code is the code, but this is about the human process of seeing, some code in a pattern that you really hate, and you ask the person to change it and they say no. And then like, what do you do with that? And awesome. these things that come up over the course of your career with living with imperfection or living with code that doesn't match what you want it to be after you have a good idea of what code should do. And it's painful.
I think of all the pain that I've probably caused other people as they've read my code, and I'm just going to prescribe your talk at ACCU, which is going to be on Friday, mind you. You'll be the opening keynote Friday. So for everyone watching, you want to come see Laura's talk live and in person and hang out in the halls with everybody at ACCU and join us to meet all the people that have probably been going for a long time, and we're going to realize what we missed. Or all the new people that are like, oh, this is what the institution is all about. So I'm excited to see you there. We got just over 2 weeks.
It's going to be great. I'm nervous, but I am a deadline-driven developer. So
yes, even the deadlines that are prescribed to us by management at faster speeds than they think we can make.
I'm fortunate that my folks are extremely reasonable, but yes, I'm looking forward
and
to
that is a cue for everybody else that is watching this, that their folks aren't reasonable, to go apply at Adobe. Laura,
yeah,
Laura can help you out with that.
It is a genuinely great place. I've been here for 5 years now. And I guess that is an interesting similarity to ACCU is that when I was looking for jobs, I was impressed at how long people stick around at Adobe. And that's the kind of stat that you can't paper over. You can't be like,
Right.
we're going to add a ping pong table. And it's like, no, we have
Yes.
skilled people who stayed for 10, 20 years. And that's why I'm so excited to go to ACCU, because a conference doesn't run that long by accident. Like something
Exactly.
extremely intentional and something extremely valuable that people keep making time to
Yep.
come together. And I can't wait to be part of it.
Same. Well, I look forward to seeing you there in a couple of weeks, Laura. Thank you so much for your time
Yeah,
this morning.
can't wait. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.